Test. And Twitch sounds okay. YouTube. Don't fail me now. I think it's all right. Where's that? Episode 154. Second week. Twitch, YouTube. Yeah. I don't think anyone really cares about the tweets anyway. So my personal laughing at myself over the lunar eclipse gif was worth it, even if nobody else gets it. Which, I mean, if they just watch the show, hopefully they would. Excuse me. There we go. Alrighty.
All right, ready to get started?
Dessert.
Hello and welcome to episode 154 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we have some roster mania news to talk about, some news that came after the first week of the qualifying, the stage 2 qualifying stuff, which is, kind of what we expected. Maybe not as quick, but we certainly thought that there would be some changes, and something that we actually talked about last week has come to fruition now. So we'll talk about that. We have some, here and there stuff. Shotzzy, I guess, talking about some of the haters that OpTic Texas has had after their slow start to the Major 2 qualifiers. And we have some other stuff we'll talk about before we finish up with predictions for week 2 of the qualifiers. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, I'm all right. Like you said, got some decent stuff to talk about. Not a ton, but some cool stuff, and should be a decent show, so might as well just do it.
Yeah, so the first and probably the biggest part of this week is the roster mania news coming out of the LA Guerrillas M8, GentleMates LAG, however you refer to them. They have made a roster change, and this is what I was talking about. We had discussed this last week, or I guess on the last episode on Sunday, and we talked about how Priestahh would probably be the first person from this roster to kind of get the boot and be that odd man out for a roster change if LAG decided to go that route, considering they're near the bottom of the CDL standings. And they did so this, when did this exactly happen? This happened yesterday afternoon. LAG officially announced the addition of Lunarz, who has been kind of killing it in challengers with, I believe, the OMIT Brooklyn roster, who's been getting just absolutely poached now. I think they've lost 2 players in 2 weeks. So that's good news for Fellow if this trend continues. But Lunarz is in and Priestahh is out. Your initial reaction, obviously, I'm not going to say like break down Lunarz film or anything. So more on the Priestahh side, how this has gone from a reunion of a world championship roster, at least 3/4 of it, to him being out of the CDL, at least for now.
Yeah, I mean, you could have asked me to break down Lunar's film. I just wouldn't have been able to do it. But he's been the hot topic in challengers, really, even before Neptune was officially picked up by Vancouver Surge. Like, obviously, Neptune's a sub, and everything we've heard about Lunarz, he's an AR/flex player. So the roles didn't necessarily line up, but just like Lunar's name has been at the top of a lot of people's lists in terms of like breakout challengers players this year. And we talked about it last episode. Like, Neptune gets picked up from challengers, and Vancouver is already 2-0 in a small sample size. And the other pickup from challengers from who was playing very well in challengers got picked up was Hook. So Lunarz has some big shoes to fill in that regard, just in the sense of continuing to show that challengers players who do well in challengers can continue to replicate that success at the next level. The most interest, again, without knowing much about Lunarz and his play style, it makes sense to me, just like knowing what Fellow can do and assuming what Fellow has been doing at this point in his career is most likely a main AR. It would make most sense for me if Lunarz is able to, use a sub a little bit here and there, just because with this roster change, he, falls into more of that flex position unless Skies is just going to start using a sub and Lunarz becomes the main AR, which I just don't foresee happening based on everything we've seen from Skies like over the years. So I'm assuming Skies is going to be main AR. Lunarz will be that flex second AR, third SMG on some maps, and you got the SMG duo of Kismet and Lens. So I will be interested to see how this change just impacts, GentleMates as a squad. I've been interested in particular in their adaptation of Skyline Hardpoint, which allowed Priestahh to get on that third SMG, and that was like the best he had played this year, I felt like. And they struggled early on when they were not really utilizing Skyline Hardpoint as much as I remember. So is that something we're going to see from this GentleMates iteration, or are we just going to see a more, they're not going to play Skyline as much because Lunarz is better with an AR than a sub? I don't know the answer to that. So I'll be interested to see how that works out. But what I really, just thinking about it from a very basic standpoint here, if Lunarz is that, like just superstar slayer, like you have him and Lens just killing everything on the map, and then you got Skies and Kismet doing the dirty work, getting rotations, getting hill time, etc. So from a very basic breakdown standpoint of the roles, that like seems like a decent recipe for success. And if when you think about it in that sense, like Priestahh just wasn't really getting a ton of kills, and I mean that's kind of reminiscent of what Vancouver just did with their change, replacing Hixie with Neptune. And again, very small sample size for Vancouver, but we already saw some signs of improvement with that team when they added more slaying power. So if Lunarz is going to offer more slaying power for this GentleMates team, I am excited for to see what they're capable of. And I'm just excited to see Lunarz play in general, because like I said, he's really been, at least from an AR perspective, I feel like he's been that top prospect things, as shout out Pharaoh. From an AR perspective, he's been at the tip of everyone's tongues for challengers prospects. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do. It's an interesting move, considering it comes after week one. GentleMates could have made this move after Major 1 and potentially got Lunarz in sooner, but apparently just one extra week of online qualifiers was the deal breaker here for Priestahh. And yeah, I guess come full circle here with Priestahh, this is 2, I don't want to say full years, obviously, because this year is not done. He could get picked up by another team, or he could even go down to challengers and start frying, similar to what we saw Hook do, and then get picked up by someone else. I wouldn't put it past him, because I still think he's a really talented player. But if this is the end of his CDL season this year, that's 2 consecutive poor CDL seasons for Priestahh after last year on a historically bad Boston Breach team. So we got to start thinking, like, how many more opportunities is Priestahh going to get? Obviously, he is a world champion. He is one of those players who throughout his career has been able to perform on a variety of roles and using a variety of guns. So that definitely plays into his, plays to his benefit, as opposed to just using Clay as an example here. Like if Clay, towards the end of his career, if he was teams were evaluating picking him up, you're only picking him up for a main AR, right? With Priestahh, you can pick him up to potentially be a main AR if he really wanted to. I mean, he used the ICR on that phase team with that didn't end up qualifying for the Pro League back in Black Ops 4. And then he even switched to the SOG and the Grapple SOG and within the same qualifier. So you could pick him up to be a sub, pick him up to be an SMG or a flex, sorry. So he's a versatile player, and that could play to his benefit and potentially give him another shot in the CDL. I hope for his sake and for his fans, this isn't the last we see of Priestahh in the CDL. But that's obviously at this point got to be a conversation that's had.
Yeah, and if there is no expansion over the next few years, then it very likely will be the last time we see him at this level. I mean, maybe he might get a shot, like with, like a Boston Breach situation where they do a late season roster change like last year, maybe something along those lines. He gets another opportunity, but it seems unlikely that would happen, just considering it's, I wouldn't, like, he was not statistically that great of a player with New York when they won the world championship, and that doesn't really mean anything because they won the championship. But I do think that players look at that and teams look at the stats more than they probably would like to admit. And then obviously, like you mentioned, these last 2 seasons have been disappointing, both statistically and from a team perspective. Like, he was on the worst team in the league last year, and now he's been on the second to worst team in the league this year. So obviously that's not great. And I just don't see an opportunity for him to just get back in the league unless he reinvents himself in a way like you were mentioning. And but there's always the possibility of that. But there's just so much competition, I would say, that really it is against him. It's working against him in that way, because there are players like Lunarz who he might not be better than Priestahh. We have to see him in live action in the CDL, but certainly Priestahh is like a known commodity at this point, and Lunarz is an unknown. It's I don't know if you've seen the Family Guy skit where it's like you can have the boat or you can have whatever's in the box. It could even be a boat. Like, there is that it's the allure of the unknown, and that I think that is enticing for teams. Especially with challengers players. Like, it is very dangerous, and that's why these top teams like Atlanta FaZe and OpTic Texas and LAT, they don't normally dip into the challenger scene as like the way to upgrade their roster, improve their team. But I think when you're a team like LAG, where you're probably not going to be able to get those big dollar, like high profile free agents, going to challengers and picking up a player like Lunarz, who is getting a lot of hype, and it sounds like deservedly so, and trying to see if he could fit within your team and improve your team, that's like the way to go for LAG. But yeah, Priestahh is going to have a really tough time competing against those kind of guys, especially if the league stays at 12 teams. And that's something we've talked about for years now. Like, that was something we literally discussed in regards to Clayster at the end of last season, of like, this could be the last time unless there's expansion. And then I feel like I would feel pretty confident if there was even 2 more teams to be added. If the league had expanded to 14 teams, I felt like, okay, yeah, Clay could probably slot in on one of those 2 rosters or on one of the existing 12, because those expansion teams are now competing for some of the same free agents that the existing CDL teams. But when there's only 12 teams, there's only 48 starters. And with the way that the CDL is set up, there's really only usually like 48 players. Like, there's not very many substitutes. You have like Miami, but they're one of the few teams that actually do that. So I don't know technically how many CDL players there are at any given moment, but I would say it's 50, 52, something like that. And that's not a lot. And if you're going by roles, and like you said, Priestahh can do both, but it's really, are you going to go with Priestahh who might be able to do both, or go with another player who can fill this specific role that you're looking for? And I think the answer is going to be clear in most of those cases. So it's going to be tough, like I said, but I'm rooting for him. I think I've always heard that he's like a really cool guy, and obviously he's a great player. He was a part of many championship teams, World Championship, that LAT team that not LAT, 100 Thieves team that you mentioned earlier was very good. He was on the initial Atlanta FaZe roster, so he has a lot to kind of hang his hat on. One more thing was D-Real, who's the head coach of GentleMates, and he was also the head coach of that NYSL team that won the World Championship a few years ago. He said, huge thank you to Preston. I thought he was talking about me, but he said, huge thank you to Preston for the work he's put in day after day. I let him down. He'll be a part of our brotherhood and still help us improve where he can. So it sounds like it might be a situation where Priestahh transitions into a coaching role, which would be very cool. Obviously, we've seen stuff like that happen over the past few seasons. Accuracy now part of the coaching staff with NYSL. I mean, all of the coach, or not all of them, but a lot of coaches in the CDL are former pros. Clayster being part of the Vegas Falcons coaching staff. JCap obviously being, not currently a coach, but he was a longtime coach for LAT. Crowder with FaZe. So it is a proven track record that those guys who competed at a high level can become coaches at a high level. And if that is the route that Priestahh goes, that would be very exciting and pretty cool. But obviously he has that connection with those specific players, at least two of them, and maybe he can help guide the team, especially with like a very unique experience to be on that team in that game and be able to help them out in a coaching role with Lunarz now coming into the team. I think that would be a pretty interesting idea. I don't know if that's happened really before. I can't think of a lot of instances where a guy gets replaced in a roster and then he starts coaching on that team, like coaching his replacement basically. I don't know how many instances of that there's been in the CDL, but I think it'd be interesting. Any kind of thoughts and opinions on that idea of Priestahh potentially going into a coaching role?
Yeah, I didn't take it as coaching. I just assumed it means like he's sticking around as a substitute, which you're saying, not a lot of teams are doing. But we literally saw it the other way around. If I remember correctly, during Black Ops 4 for 100 Thieves, Priestahh got no. Was it? I don't remember. I think it was Priestahh.
Yeah, Priestahh got sick at an event,
and Pharaoh had to sub in.
I believe it was Priestahh, yes.
Yeah, and Pharaoh hadn't played with the team in months.
Yeah, he was just at the hotel.
At the event. Yeah. And he had to sub in. So we've seen it the other way around with Priestahh, and obviously, the most recent example where it didn't come to a substitute, but the whole Vivid Eye thing at Major 1, despite whatever we've talked about with his stats potentially being better at Major 1 than they were online when he could only see out of one eye, that thing looked pretty bad and looked basically shut to me. So if Carolina had a competent sub on their roster and they decided to go with their substitute over Vivid in the Major 1 matches, I wouldn't have been surprised. But obviously that's in the past now. For LAG, at least for GentleMates here, they have that, flexibility now if Priestahh does remain with the organization on a substitute basis. I just, they have D-Real and Marky B, if I remember correctly, as coaches. So I don't feel like they need Priestahh to be a quote-unquote coach, but he is that type of just player, and everything we've heard about him as just a person and, breaking down COD and that sort of thing with team. He comes from that replay / Crowder background, and we know how, good of a coach Crowder is and how much he's influenced Priestah's career over the years and whatnot. So I wouldn't be surprised if he just stays on as a sub and, is helping the team behind the scenes, breaking down VOD and coming up with strats, etc. I just, the part of the D-Real tweet that really surprised him was, I let him down. I don't know how D-Real could have let him down unless based on what we know as D-Real as a coach, he's not even when it was the NYSL squad, Sender was the one coming up with S&D strats and stuff like that. So it's not like D-Real was drawing up plays that were oh, Priestahh, go bait yourself and go 0-40 in this map, and we're gonna tank your KD and then that you're gonna get replaced. I don't know. So the I let you down part is A little confusing to me. It might just be, D-Real
I
taking
think
the high
it's
road and saying something nice.
yeah.
But end of the day, yeah, this is just I feel like this is really similar just based on Priestah's statistical performance this year. It really lines up with the Vancouver and Hicksey move in the sense of if Lunar comes in and adds slaying powder right away, this could greatly improve GentleMates as a team. So we'll just have to see how it works out for them, and we'll have to see what the future holds for Priestahh. Whether it, I mean, I could definitely see him move into coaching. I don't know if that's happening now or anytime soon, but when it's all said and done, he does retire. If he became a coach, that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
The way I took the D-Real tweet was what you said. Like, he's just taking the high road. Like, that's what coaches in traditional sports, like, I didn't put him in the right positions, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's the way to kind of say, like, yeah, this player wasn't performing up to standard, and, there's no reason to pile on when you're replacing him, I guess, is the way to look at it, which is, the mature way of, like, of replacing someone. It's not ideal to go and say, like, yeah, he's dog shit. Like, he's a cancer to this team or whatever. There's no reason, especially, and I hadn't seen Priestah's tweet about it. But yeah, he said he was moved to the bench. So he is on the team, at least from like that wording, that he's still on the team with LAG, which is good. And I mean, if you're the substitute and you've been replaced, you probably are kind of like in a coaching role, like a quasi coaching role anyway. Like, unless you're just completely separate from the team and you're just playing challengers by yourself. I don't know. Like, it just feels like it'd kind of be a waste of a roster spot if he's not helping in some way in the day-to-day operations of the new team and like the new roster and stuff. But yeah, that's interesting, I guess. I had one last point that something that you had said. I'm trying to think what it, I lost my train of thought. Oh, it was the fact that you said how it was interesting that they waited until now to make this roster change rather than do it, 2-3 weeks ago. And I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know why they wouldn't have made this change unless they really thought like the Boston Breach match from this past weekend was like the litmus test of like whether we should make this change. And I guess maybe it is. Maybe it's possibly just because of the S&D. That's been their weak point all season long, and they lost 2 S&Ds in that series. I think it was like 6-3 and then 6-2 or something like that. And maybe they were just like, we have no way of salvaging what we're doing now in Search and Destroy. So like, let's just pull the trigger and not wait any longer. But yeah, other than that, it seems bizarre to wait an extra week or, really, like, they could have made this change probably 3 weeks ago, right after the major, and they could have had all that practice time with Lunarz going into the Major 2 qualifiers, going into that breach match, and I'm not sure exactly why they waited. That just doesn't seem like the logical decision to make, but I don't know. I got to look to see if they play a really hard team. I mean, they play Miami in their first match this week, and then they play Vancouver. I don't know, like, I wouldn't say that Boston is some kind of juggernaut that you're trying to avoid. Like, how traditional sports or in football, some teams will wait to bench their quarterback until they like play a bad team or something, like, you bench a quarterback before they play a bad team because you don't want them to kind of prove that they're good enough to stay around for another week or two. I don't know if that was the line of thinking or the opposite, but it just seems very odd to me that they didn't make this change earlier. But
I agree.
Maybe they were just kind of holding out hope. Maybe that was all there was. Just like, Priestahh was their guy from the NYSL stuff, and they thought, let's let him ride for at least one more week, see what we have, and it just didn't work out. Next up, we had Shotzzy talking some crap, I guess, and I don't know, like, it's weird because I don't know, like, why. I don't know why there would be a ton of hate about OpTic. It's 1 week. I understand that there's always kind of some panic around that team for some reason, but them going 0-6 and 0-2 in 1 week is surprising. It's, I'm sure, disappointing for their fans, but it's also not the end of the world. But I guess some people have taken it as the end of the world, and so they've been kind of talking about like, that this was a horrible roster change or blah blah blah. And Shotzzy was on his stream, and he said, "This is the moment where you can truly talk shit. So just keep the same energy. I still think everyone is dog shit." So that is that is very on brand. I mean that's kind of the way to look at it from his perspective. Like, there are definitely people that are louder now in their criticism than they were like 3 weeks ago for OpTic, and those people have something to kind of criticize now. Then like right before the major, I don't think there was a lot of criticism about OpTic. So I don't know, like, what do you think about this? It just seems like kind of weird that this is all happening right now.
I just think in general, and some OpTic Greenwall fans might not agree with what I'm about to say, but I feel like it's not the most outlandish thing I've ever said, is that certain OpTic fans and Greenwall fans have very, very short-term memory. And it literally, not even just the fact that this team went through this whole Pred situation, which was an unexpected roster change based on everything we know. Like, they were not planning on getting rid of Pred. If whatever his personal situation didn't happen, he would have just played this entire season so far up to this point, as far as we know. So not only is that a factor in this equation, and not only did these four players who are now back on the team win champs together, but before they won champs, they literally came in last place at the final major last season before champs. And I like it's like we always joke, and I mean it's not necessarily a fully a joke, it's partially a joke at this point, but it's also kind of true. It's like the Greenwall has that "you ain't first, you're last" mentality, and they bring Pred back into the lineup here, and they have a rough week with him back. 06 map count, no other way to look at it. That's just the worst map breakdown you can have when you play 2 best-of-5 series. And there are literally people calling for Kenny to be dropped, and like all this stuff after just like 2 online series. And I get it's like, compounded with the top 8 finish at the major and the Pred stuff and yada yada. And it doesn't help that Kenny didn't particularly play well in these last 2 series against FaZe and who was
Minnesota.
Minnesota, yes, thank you. So that, I mean, just big picture for OpTic, like, yeah, this clip could have been like posted after that last major last year, right? Like, Shotzzy's like, yeah, you better get us now, because this is literally the lowest point we're at. And they're not even, I mean, technically 06 map count is pretty similar to last place finish in a major, but not really, because one's online, one's at LAN, but tomato there. It's a similar situation where if OpTic just like starts frying now, and let's just say they win major 2, like what are people gonna say? Like, what are those people who are gonna say like dropping Kenny on February 20th if they're hoisting a trophy a month from now or whenever major 2 actually is in the same venue where they won champs? Like, what are those people gonna be saying at that point? So I don't know. I just think in general, this whole there was another clip too of Shotzzy like talking about his villain arc and like how he's like, I don't even know where that came from or whatever. And it's like, it's kind of funny that's like, sorry, I think there was a clip of Maven talking about it in one of the pre or post shows last week on the CDL broadcast. But whatever it is, like, if Shotzi's like gonna just be this guy now who says what's on his mind and doesn't give a shit what anybody thinks and just gonna tell you how it is, I'm all for it. Because I'm not saying it's the same level of comparative 1-to-1 to Aches, but like just that type of energy of like being willing to say anything. Like, we longtime COD fans know, even before all the recent stuff Like Aches literally got suspended from online matches in MLG days, I think in like Ghost or Black Ops 3 for like arguing with admins and stuff. Like, again, so it's not like super comparable, but just for lack of a better example, if Shotzzy's going to be able to, or is going to be willing to be that person who's just like, yeah, I'm gonna say whatever I'm thinking. I don't care what anybody thinks about what I got to say. This is what I'm thinking. Here, you can hear it and you can do with it what you want. Like, I'm all for it. And I think it could, you know, I don't think it's gonna necessarily blow up in his face, because I just think, there's too much talent on that OpTic team. I think he's too talented as an individual player. Um, but end of the day, like he's put this out there now. Like, yeah, you talk your shit now, but when we're uh back on top, like, just remember and what you were saying before. So I'm excited. I think I don't necessarily think this is a big deal, but um end of the day, it's just what people are talking about right now. And when OpTic's quote unquote struggling because they lose 2 series with their new roster in the first week, like, and people are calling for roster changes, I'm all for Shotzzy like firing back at fans if they're willing to like be like, yeah, drop this 2-time world champion because we lost 2 online series. Like, Shotzzy can say whatever he wants as far as I'm concerned.
I don't really know how to feel about an OpTic player being the villain. I don't even know if that is something that actually can happen. That's like saying you're fighting the system when you are the system. Like they're just so far above everyone in terms of popularity. I just don't know if he can be the villain. He can be a villain to certain people. He could be
of course
to the anti-OpTic people, but they are like the minority of CDL or COD esports fans. So I thought that part was interesting.
You watched The Last Dance, I assume, right?
Yeah.
For Jordan, there's the clip of him like holding the baseball bat in the locker room, and he's saying like, it's easy to talk shit when you're ahead. It's when you're down, and or however he phrases it. That's what I'm thinking of right here. And like, there are certainly some people who think of or thought of Michael Jordan as a villain, but I think, kind of like you said, the majority of people didn't. So that's probably a better comparison.
Yeah, probably like not even like LeBron is a villain to a section of fans, but there's I don't even know if it's a majority, but there's certainly like a large contingent of fans of LeBron, I think OpTic is akin to the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, where it is literally just like they are by far the most popular team, and Shotzzy is by far the most popular player on the most popular team. So like for him to be the villain is like the villain is Scrap, like because Scrap is very outspoken about everything basically, and he has kind of like this I don't know, like contention with both FaZe and OpTic at various different times and in various ways. But I mean, it's here nor there. But I also don't really understand I understand the initial reaction of saying drop Kenny, like not as like I think that it should happen, but when a team goes 0-6 in map count, I understand like the most like the stupidest fans in that group saying drop him. I understand that those people exist and like why they exist. I don't understand why it has become a big thing in the community to talk about those people. Like this was not a groundswell of support for benching or dropping Kenny. There are outspoken people in the community that have really stupid opinions about CDL teams. Like, I'm sure if you go back to after champs last season, I'm sure there were people thinking that they should drop Simp, Abizi, or I'm talking about FaZe, drop Celium, drop Draza, like just do all, like just take a stick of dynamite and throw it into the roster.
We were having that conversation literally during the holiday break this year.
Yeah. But
like not even, we weren't saying like,
yeah,
yes, they need to make a roster change, but we were just bringing up the fact that like, hey, a roster change might be being discussed here.
yeah, and that I think that is what you can think about. You can think, okay, maybe there is thoughts or opinions like those within OpTic's camp. Maybe there are people within OpTic that think Kenny should be benched. I think that is something that you can actually talk about, that there's like, you never know. I mean, Luka Doncic was just traded by the Dallas Mavericks. Like, so everything is kind of on the table. We just saw Pred get like excommunicated for 2 months and then come back and replace Hook. So I think like you can have that opinion, or you just think that it's a possibility that Kenny will be benched or get dropped by OpTic. I think that's fine. I don't know why people are talking about it so much. It is not happening, like, as far as we know. He has not played well. OpTic did not play well this past week, and they didn't necessarily play well at the first major. But like, I just don't see OpTic being like real quick to make those big changes. They've shown over the years to be pretty conservative with the roster changes that they make in season. Aside from that scump year, like that was kind of an anomaly. And even this, like, I don't think they would have made a roster change so far this season had Pred not done whatever and then had to go away. Like, so I really don't think that that's happening unless they crater, unless it's just an abysmal, like they go and just, they finish Major 2 qualifiers with a really bad record. Kenny's horrible. They go to Major 2, they place horrible. Kenny does poorly again. Then there's that conversation and it's going to get louder. I just don't like, I didn't really get why people like Nameless and other people on Twitter were like talking about this talk about like you're brain dead if you think Kenny should get dropped. Like, of course, like what are we talking about? Like, it just feels like we need something to talk about in the community. It just, I don't know. It felt like almost artificial in a way, like this idea of like benching Kenny. It just, I don't know. It didn't feel like there was much support outside of like the worst kind of fans in the OpTic green wall community.
But like, I mean, I forget when we were talking about it. Maybe it was last year around that Major 4 time, but that doesn't make sense because they wouldn't have been, looking to make a roster change ahead of champs. But I just remember like breaking down the roster and talking about it on here. Like, Shotzzy's not going anywhere. Dashy's not going anywhere after that whole Dashy versus Rambo thing where Hex literally stepped in, like put his foot down and said like, yeah, Dashy's not going anywhere. And then Pred was like the guy who was talked about beforehand, like when he was on Seattle and they tried to get him, and then Seattle reportedly, allegedly upped the buyout price, and then Hex was like, yeah, we'll pay that, and then they upped it again or whatever that situation was. So like, he was wanted on OpTic for a long time seemingly before he actually joined. And then Kenny was kind of just like, I don't want to say he was a throw-in, but like based on the reports and everything we heard, it was kind of like OpTic wanted Draza. Draza chose to go to FaZe, and then Kenny was available and ended up joining the team when Draza goes to FaZe. And talking about it from that perspective, I remember bringing that up and saying like how, Kenny, I'm pretty sure this had to have been before they won champs, because even I remember those episodes we had where it was like, oh, Kenny's a multi world champion now, and Shotzzy, and then we did the whole like top 10, top 15 breakdown thing. So I don't remember when this was, but like for, without going on a tangent here, like Kenny is that type of, and that's not even the right way of saying it, just with the makeup of this roster and considering Shotzzy and Dashy seemingly being untouchable status, Pred basically being, I don't think he's untouchable, obviously, because he left the roster, but like he was just brought back in. So they're not going to say like, oh, bring back Hook or get rid of Pred again. Like, he just came back. So it's like, feels like Kenny is the easy target regardless of how he's been playing. And again, it doesn't help that he had 2 pretty poor series this past weekend statistically. So that just makes him an easy target to be that sort of scapegoat, as we've talked about in other situations with other organizations or whatnot. So I think End of the day, I don't think anything's going to come from this. I would be very surprised, like you said, if there was some sort of major in season, because I feel like, with OpTic, we even, and this kind of ties us in with the Lunarz topic we were just talking about earlier. So I think it's a nice bow to put on it. Um when Ghosty was picked up by OpTic, that was like the first time they took a chance on like a quote unquote rookie since like Scump. Like, and Scump wasn't even really a rookie because he had won those tournaments in Black Ops 1 with Quantic Leverage.
Yeah.
So, that was a rare instance of OpTic picking up a player from challengers. So even if you know, OpTic did decide to make a roster change midseason, I feel like it would be like they would target somebody on a really good team. I'm just going to throw this name out there. I don't think this is going to happen, but just for lack of a better name right now, Scrap. Let's say OpTic's like, shit, we got to make a move. We're going to throw the bag at Scrap and see if he wants to leave LAT, come put on, the white jersey on Championship Sunday for OpTic. And that could cause a major domino effect of roster mania throughout the rest of the league. That's the type of move. If OpTic were to make a move, that's what we would expect based on what's happened in the past outside of that ghosty situation, kind of like you talked about. And I brought up Lunarz there because I wanted to say this earlier and I forgot about it, but that's like the whole thing with Lunarz right now is it really that's what it feels similar to the ghosty call up in the sense of like we heard about this kid ghosty dropping 1.4 in challengers and then he comes up to OpTic and he just doesn't have to do that because he surrounded by other superstars like Shotzzy, Dashy, and Hook at that time. Or Illy, whatever the roster was at that time. So it will be interesting to see from Lunar's perspective if he continues to, be this guy or to show like that sort of, what we've seen from Ghosty now. He's able to be the super hard carry, dropping the 1.4 KDs. He's also able to do the dirty work and all that stuff. So I just went on a little bit of tangent there. I was all over the place, but it's late. Long story short, I just think with OpTic, Kenny, everyone's got to take a chill pill. We'll see what happens here in these upcoming matches. If he continues to struggle, we know how talented Kenny is as a player and what he expects of himself. He expects to be one of those top players and somebody who's doing better than what he's doing. I had the tweet. Here it is. I put it on the match instead of up above in the notes. He tweeted on literally it was like 4 minutes after we ended our last show on Sunday. That's why I put in the notes. He said, actually unacceptable for me. Feel terrible to everyone who supports me. Gotta just be better. Simple as that. Sucks, but I've been here before. GG's phase in Minnesota. So like he knows he didn't play great. He doesn't have to hear it from all these Greenwall people who are supposed to be his supporters and all that stuff saying he needs to be dropped, yada yada. Like we just gotta see what form he shows up in these next matches. And if OpTic can get the ball rolling now that Pred's back in the picture.
Kenny is also in a different stage of his career. Like he's not the guy that we saw with Team Caliber in World War II, where he's the Shotzzy basically in that situation where he's just the dominant slayer and just doing all this ridiculous stuff. Like he hasn't been that player for a few years. Like he can be at certain points. And obviously he's been very instrumental to like several team success. Like there's a reason that over the last 4 years, 2 of his teams have won the world championship. So it's like, obviously he has a big impact on these teams, but he's also just not in that position to drop the big numbers anymore. I don't know if it's like necessarily the skill or anything, but it's just like he's kind of like in a family, like one person eats first and then the second person, and at some point nobody has the last person doesn't have much to eat, and I feel like Kenny is in that situation.
We've talked about it with the phase roster with all this the carousel of fourth players and stuff like that, and we've talked about it even when looking at like the super teams like LA Thieves and stuff this year. Like there are only so many kills on the map. When Kenny is surrounded by Shotzzy, Dashy, and Pred, like there's only so much he can do if they are getting all the kills, which is what they should be doing in their roles. And this always it's one of my favorite. It's I'd have to pull my phone up and get the exact quote, but it's one of my favorite things when I got to talk to JCap towards the end of his playing career. It wasn't even actually at the end of it. It would have been 2017, 2018, sometime in there. One of the things he always said about that NV team after they won the World Championships in Black Ops 3 was something along the lines of like, if I'm the worst player on my team, I'm okay with that because I know what I'm capable of. And that's like, it's no shot to JCap at that time. He was playing with John, Apathy, and Slasher. And he's like, yeah, if I'm the worst guy on my team, like I know what I'm gonna do. And then like you could say I'm the worst, like, okay, I'm the worst guy on a team that won a world championship. Like Kenny I don't think if that's the mentality Kenny has right now, and I would have to actually talk to him to hear if he agreed with that. But like, if Kenny was to say, yeah, I'm the worst player on a team with Shotzzy, Dashy, and Pred, like, oh no, lock me up and throw me in jail, right? Like that's there are definitely worse things. You can be the worst player on worse teams, right? So I think that's part of it, is like he doesn't have to drop those numbers that we've seen before. And it's also, I mean, like you're comparing it to team caliber, Kenny, like it's just different roles. And that, I mean, we had heard over the years now that Kenny preferred using an AR and didn't even really like using a sub, but he just liked using the PPSH in World War II because it was the best gun and he was good at it. So it was like, it kind of just like worked out because he was also on a team with money chain and accuracy. So it's like, there would have been a ton of ARs and then Theory running around dropping a 0.6. No shots at Theory there unintentionally. But yeah, I think, if Kenny felt the need to go out there and pull out a sub and drop a 1.3 KD, I'm sure he could do it, but is that going to be what, makes OpTic the best team? Like that doesn't just, I mean, people talk about the whole like players getting older and stuff, yada yada, like it doesn't just go away. Like I'm sure Kenny could you know hard frag if he really wanted to be that guy, but just his role on this OpTic team from the outside looking in, he's got to be that veteran presence. He's got 3 kids who can just slay with the best of them, and if he puts them in the right position to do the right thing, that should in theory give him the best chance to win and his team the best chance to win. And I think that's like, I guess that's without actually having an IGL quote unquote role in Call of Duty. Like that's what it feels like his role with this team is right now. And we've seen, like in Counter-Strike and stuff. So as players progress in their careers, they go from dropping huge numbers to becoming an IGL and their stats take a hit. Like, I don't know. I think it's way too early. I think we're talking way too long about this when it's just a silly clip from Shotzy's Twitch. So I'm gonna shut up because I'm tired of listening to myself already.
I think what we're talking about is like, it is about ego and about accepting that you don't need to be the guy. And Kenny, I don't know when this would have been. Like, I feel like he was still kind of the guy with OGLA. So it's been over these last like 4 years. At some point he decided, I don't need to be the like main slayer. Like I can accept a role that is like taking a step back in terms of statistics to help my team win. And I think that says a lot about him as a player, because not everybody is willing to do that. Not everybody is willing to like give up their kills. Like even Dashy has admitted it this past offseason that he really was being selfish and he thought more about getting kills, and he like resented players that were having success who he knew he was better than. And he's like, yeah, maybe I should focus more on like doing the right thing instead of, getting the kills. And like Kenny, I think is, he's far past that. And I think that's why we're in this situation, because if Kenny was more selfish, the team probably has the same exact results or worse. I guess they could get blown out worse on these maps, but he could have a better KD, he could have better stats, and then people could say, well, it's not Kenny's fault. Look how he dropped to 1.1. Like, he's not the reason that they lost. But I don't know. It just, we probably are talking about it too much, but I think that it says a lot about these players who just kind of understand, like you said with JCap, like, okay, what if I am the worst player on this team? Like, if we win, nobody cares about that. Like, they just see that we won champs. And JCap is like the perfect example because he hung on a long time, like far past what I thought he would. And like, he was, considered washed or like not nearly at his peak because his peak was like literally like 2011,
best player in Black Ops 1.
Yeah. So it's literally, he was like a decade after, I think he retired like literally a decade after he was like at his peak. And, but he was consistently competing. And I think he went to like 5 grand finals of champs and like the first 7 or 8 champs, he was a part of like 5 grand finals. So it's pretty crazy that, and I mean, JCap knows Kenny pretty well. I don't know if that rubbed off on him and that attitude or like the way to embrace it. But something that I literally remembered while we were talking about OpTic was a clip that I saw this past week. And it was like the Scump Watch Party. I don't know if you had saw this live, but Hex suggested combining the Esports World Cup and COD Champs together and then combine the prize pools into a $4 million event. And I had I just think it's a bad idea, like just straight up. I don't see why you would do this because COD needs more events. I think it's good that we have both of these events, and if we just continue to have both champs and EWC, then like that is the perfect solution. I did I didn't link it, but the Adam Apicella, who obviously was like the head of MLG, like he ran pretty much all of the COD events for years and years and years. He had the suggestion of keeping champs the way it is and where it's like a CDL only event where it's basically the playoffs, the culmination of the CDL season.
Yeah.
And then having EWC be the kind of like the old COD champs where it's more of an open event. There's like a way to qualify for teams outside of the CDL. I think that is actually a great solution.
Yes.
Like that would incentivize challengers players to continue to keep going through the season. That would also expose the audience of the CDL up to challengers players who, if you don't seek out challengers, you have absolutely no idea. Like there are people that are literally going to see Lunarz for the very first time when he plays for LAG this weekend. And if there was an opportunity for him to be kind of showcased at this event with CDL teams, we would have already seen him. We would already know who he is and like how he plays and how good he is. And I think something like that would work. I would love to see like a 32 team event come back and open it up to all of these different regions, how they can qualify. I think just give the CDL teams 12 automatic bids, and then however you want to do the 20 teams around the world and like the top challengers teams from each region, they come and they compete, and you could have a $2 million or however much champs is, and then have like a $2 or $3 million EWC event. And you could even move it around. I know that Hex had said that he had already talked to some owners about making champs an annual event in Las Vegas, which I don't think is that's not a bad idea. Like, I mean, it was an annual event in like Los Angeles or Southern California for a number of years. And I think people got tired of that, like in a way, but I also don't think it really matters all that much. Like as long as it's a good venue and it's a good crowd, that's really, I think, all that really matters at the end of the day. But what do you think of this idea of combining EWC and champs, or Adam Apicella's suggestion of making it EWC a COD champs event?
I like Adam Apicella's idea a lot more than the combining. I just think there's been enough controversy with the whole Esports World Cup and the Saudi involvement and whatnot. Like combining it would just cause more trouble, I feel like, and there would be, end of the day, there that would hold, that would raise like a whole nother issue with like, there's already the people who like talk about like champs before CDL, champs before CWL, et cetera, et cetera. Like now we'd have a throw a new wrench into like breaking down like what champs quote unquote is. And so yeah, I think let Esports World Cup be its own thing. COD being involved in it is good for the sake of, getting more eyes on the product, having more tournaments to play for the players, all that stuff. So yeah, I think let the CDL playoffs or end of season, postseason, whatever you want to look at it, let that be COD champs, and then Esports World Cup for Call of Duty be its own separate thing. And if they did want to do some sort of thing, like you said, Adam Apicella suggested, I'm so down. If that gets us closer to like the old format of pool play, double elim bracket, all that good stuff, like yeah, sign me up for that.
Yeah, I think the only problem is I don't know if EWC would actually want them to like host it outside of Saudi Arabia. Like, isn't that the whole point for them, is to bring people into the country and then kind of expose people to Saudi Arabia through the events and stuff, because they do like all the pretty much like all the major games, and I think everybody has to go to Saudi Arabia for those. So I don't even know if it's even plausible to do that. Not saying like it wouldn't be cool for all those teams to go to Saudi Arabia, but I just think the interest is like diminished if they're forced to go there, not because of any like political reason, but just time zones really get screwed up when like I remember with EWC, like the matches started at like 7 a.m. like Eastern time or something like that. So the times were all screwed up for the American audience, which is like, let's be honest, like most COD fans are in North America or in the UK. Like there's really not a ton of fans elsewhere. At least in terms of like the viewing audience. Like, of course we have like France and Spain, but like it's pretty much like mostly NA and UK, and those times have to be kind of conducive to those audiences to bring it in, especially if it's going to be this big like end of season World Cup event where you're inviting all of these teams. I just think it almost makes it less important if if these matches start at like 9 a.m. Eastern. I don't think that's going to work. But if Hex can figure something out where he doesn't combine two of those events into one, like that would be like a bad idea. Just like straight up, there's no way to look at that and say that's a good idea. I think there would be some people that would be excited because like, oh my God, look at this $4 million event. And like, we have this big, like almost like a coup de grace of the CDL season. But at another point, it's just like you're getting rid of basically two events, or you're getting rid of an event just to add like a little bit of hype, I guess, to the other event, which you might not even do. I don't know, but my thoughts have been made known, I guess, on this topic. Kind of related to the Saudi thing, I guess, is a good segue. ASIM has joined the Vegas Falcons Academy roster in place of Vale. I mean, that's interesting, I guess. Like, I don't know if it'll lead to anything. I don't know if they have any interest in bringing up ASIM to the CDL roster, or if it's just simply, he could help out the academy team and, help help with connections at the very least, because ASIM is like a very well-liked person in the community. What are your thoughts on this?
That's my immediate reaction was if things continue to go the way they have been for Vegas Falcons and they just have like a revolving carousel of roster moves, like it feels like ASIM could get another shot in the CDL through this, Vegas Falcons team. The only thing we were talking before we went live, I don't know the whole language barrier. Like I don't know how how fluent ASIM is and the language of the team and whatnot. So I don't know how realistic that is, but if he's on the Falcons Academy team, we've already seen 3 Academy players, I think, now make it to the Falcons main roster at this point. So, if they keep struggling, you put Asim in this Vegas Falcons team, they have a better shot of winning a hard point than they currently do. It might be a hot take for some, but I feel like that's not a super outlandish statement.
Yeah, I mean, I would say though, Asim's last stint with Vegas, not the Falcons, but the Legion, they did go whatever 0-9 or 0-12 or something in map count. So maybe it could get worse. You never know. There's you brought this up, the bullet map, where it's literally just a single lane. It has a very phallic like structure. I think there were people pointing that out as well. So certainly we're going to see this as a comp map, right?
No, I do not think so. It it doesn't I mean, just it's got to be the skinniest map in Call of Duty history. I can't think of any map that's like I said to you before when we went live. Like, this is as one lane as one lane maps can get. On a less trolly note for this, I believe, was it Wetworks in COD 4? No shit. What was the rainy map in COD 4? No, it was Wetwork. Yeah, it was super dark, but it was literally just like a boat, and everything was in straight. So like, I mean, that's what I was thinking of when I saw this, and obviously Wetwork was bigger, or wider than what we're seeing here from this mini map image. But that was like the mindset I got. And there was that other map, I think it was called Lifeline. That was kind of like similar to Hijacked from Black Ops 2. Like, it had that same like shape of the boat, but it was just smaller. So I guess those are 2 other maps you can think of in comparison to this, and based on what we see here, this is way more narrow than both of those. So I mean, based on this, it'll be interesting. I mean, like, a sniper can, in theory, just look down the whole map. But obviously there'll be some obstacles and stuff in the way of certain things. But like, you don't have to sway too much left and right. Like, you aim down sights, there's a good chance somebody's right in front of you.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting as like kind of a fun like event. Not obviously like anything esports related, but having the CDL players play like a series on these maps that are like certainly not for competitive. Like, have them play a hard point or something. I don't even know if there would be a hard point on this map, but like play a hard point on bullet, play like on shipment, like play search on shipment or something like that. Just as like, all right, like go mess around. Let's have a little bit of like haha, I guess. I don't know if it would, have any interest from fans, but it could be something just to add like a different aspect of maybe like an all-star event. I know that they tried one of those years, but maybe something like that would end up working out. Yeah, and then Scrap crashed his car, I guess. I don't know much about that. I did not watch this video. So did you watch the video?
Well, he said like he was in the parking garage and he was doing like 10 miles an hour, and it like I guess it was colder in Texas, and he just I would assume he like slipped on ice or something, but like based on his description, it seemed very weird that the car was literally like on its side, flipped over, and reportedly might be totaled. So I don't know, but it definitely, good thing for him that everything's, okay. Like, he showed a picture of him and Shane. Shane was apparently in the car with him, and Scrap had a bloody nose. He said like all the airbags went off, and he thought his nose was broken because he said like literally the tip of his nose was killing him and it was hurting. And he was like, as long as my hands are good, I'm good. And I guess that's a good way to look at it. But yeah, definitely something. I saw that late yesterday, and I was like, Scrap totaled his car. What the hell? And then like I saw this clip, and I was like, oh, that's a weird way for it to happen. As somebody who has totaled a car before, not a great experience.
Jaws will probably put down that sheet of ice and little sabotage at play. Let's talk about these matches, though. We obviously have week 2 of the Major 2 qualifiers starting on Friday, February 21st. I believe we have 10 matches this week. 3 on Friday, 4 on Saturday, and then another 3 on Sunday. And then I believe we have the minor next weekend. And something that we talked about before the show went live, but I'm not sure if like most people are aware, the minor seeds are already official. They're like the Major 2 qualifiers had no effect on what seed you are for minor 2, which I thought was weird. I wasn't aware of that until right before last week. But yeah, like the whatever seed and however many CDL points you had at the end of Major 1, that was the seed you were going to be for minor 2. So I think the bracket is already out and like official and everything for the second minor, which if you're just now tuning in or you weren't paying attention when the first minor happened, like about a month ago, it is a single elimination online tournament involving all 12 of the CDL teams, and the minor gives out CDL points, but they are not added to the Major 2 qualifier standings. They're added to the CDL season standings. Basically, if you win the minor, then that really increases your chances of qualifying for champs, but it actually has no bearing on whether you get into the winner's bracket of Major 2. FaZe notably had to really work and grind their way out of the hole they dug themselves into in the Major 1 qualifiers. After their poor start, they won minor 1 and then still had to win a few matches to finish the qualifiers to make sure that they were in the winner's bracket. So we could see something like that happen in Major 2 as well. Friday, February 21st, we have 3 matches, the first of which, Minnesota versus Carolina. I think we both have to go with the Rocker. Like, they're coming off of one of their best wins of the season, if not their best win, a 3-0 sweep of OpTic Texas. And Carolina has been up and down. Their hard point specifically has been a point of concern. So are you going with Minnesota as well?
Yeah, I'll take Minnesota, but I do think, just based on everything we've seen from both teams really, but from Minnesota in particular, like Minnesota got off to that 2-0 start at the qualifiers last time, and then they played LA Thieves and somebody else, and they played close matches, but they ended up losing heading into the holiday break, and they were 2-2, if I remember correctly. So, like, just Minnesota is a team. They have the potential. I've sung my praises for them enough at this point, really. But like we know Carolina's struggled in hardpoint. I don't really think Minnesota's a great hardpoint team. Like they might be improving in that regard recently. But like if Carolina can take a respawn and then it gets to the S&D, and the S&D really, like, Minnesota's a pretty good S&D team, but sometimes in those game 5s they slip up and they play a lot of game 5s because they have a lot of reverse sweeps. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina pulled something off here. I just think Minnesota's the hotter team right now, and I'm going to stick with them here.
Next up, Miami versus LAG. We're not sure if Metals is going to be in the lineup or if it's going to be Super again, but we do know that Lunarz will make his CDL debut with LAG this week. I'm going to go with the Guerrillas, and I mean, obviously, I've been high on them all season. I've been optimistic, at least, about them, and with Lunarz coming in, I'm thinking that maybe he is the way to turn around this team, so I'm going to go with LAG.
I was thinking you were going to go with Miami, but yeah, I'm glad you said it. That's I wanted to make sure we at least noted. We do not know what's going on with Metals, if Super's going to be playing or not for Miami here, so that's got to be factored in here. But we talked about it with Neptune just this past week. Like, you want to have a map, a debut that's winnable, at least on paper. And obviously with Neptune, we didn't think it was with Atlanta FaZe, but they ended up taking the dub. So I'm going with, thinking the roster change, honeymoon phase, however you want to phrase it, worked out for Vancouver last week. I think GentleMates come out hot here and take a win from Miami, regardless of whether Metals or Super is in the lineup. But obviously if Super is back, or sorry, if Meadows is back, I think that gives Miami a better chance. And, I think Miami is favored just without really, um, overthinking it or thinking too much in depth. But I think this roster change could be the catalyst that GentleMates need to turn things around. And I think they got a shot to do it here.
Yeah, we are not keeping up to date on the betting odds of CDL qualifying matches. Let's just say that. C9 and Vegas are the last match, Cloud9.
Yep, C9.
And then Saturday, February 22nd, starting off with Atlanta versus Miami. Going to go with Atlanta.
Me too.
Carolina versus OpTic, which is a very interesting matchup. Carolina could be in a kind of a hole if they lose that Minnesota match to start the week. And this is OpTic's only match all week. So if they lose, they are 0-3 to start the qualifiers. And then obviously we have the minors. So they'll kind of be lingering on that 0-3 for 2 weeks. I'm going to go with OpTic, but man, like that's probably the most interesting matchup for me personally of the entire weekend.
Well, this was the match we saw. This is Carolina knocked OpTic out of Major 1 with this matchup, right? And obviously it's a different roster now with Pred, but the same thing holds true here. Like heading into that match, OpTic didn't have a hard point win. I don't know if Carolina did, but Carolina obviously got stomped in those 2 hard points in the winners bracket with LAT. They played Vegas, I think, the round before they played OpTic in the losers bracket, so they obviously won a hard point. But nonetheless, this was OpTic's only hard point win of Major 1 was against Carolina. It was like 250 to 248 or something, map 1. So I think that's going to be the difference maker here for this. It's 2 teams that, have had struggles recently in hardpoint. Obviously, the struggles have expanded for OpTic to 0-6 at this point with this current roster. But nonetheless, if one of these teams gets hot, starts strong in the map 1 hardpoint, that could, light the fire and get them going for the rest of the series. So I'm going to take OpTic 2. I'm not super confident. I think, again, similar to Carolina's first match against Minnesota, these are 2 winnable matches for Carolina if they come out in the early season form that we saw from them. But if they come out in the form like after the holiday break and, kind of when they hit a little bit of a downturn, like these are 2 losable matches. Then Carolina's sitting at 0-4. Then we're talking about potential roster changes again. Or did Carolina play 2 matches last week? They'd be winless regardless, I believe. But anywho, yeah. They don't have.
I think they just played 1.
Maybe they only played 1. Okay, regardless, they'd be winless if they lose to Minnesota and OpTic. So yeah, it's on paper, I do think this is an interesting match, and I'm not super confident in OpTic, but it's hard to be super confident in OpTic and against anybody right now just because of what we saw last week in 06 performance. So I'll take OpTic, but I'm gonna have my eye on this one.
Yeah, so they're actually 0-2. They played LAT and Toronto in their 2 matches last week. So and they're 1-6 in map count. So 1-6 versus 0-6. One of these teams will be 0-3 to start the qualifiers. Or I guess if Carolina loses Minnesota, they would be 0-4 as well. So I mean, there's a lot at stake for 2 teams that are in like the top 5 in the CDL standings as far as I know. LAG versus Vancouver is next. I'm going a little bit off the beaten path. I know Vancouver, there's a lot of hype after week 1 of the qualifiers, and deservedly so. But I'm going to go with LAG. Like I said, I've been high on them for a while. I've just been like waiting pretty much optimistically that they were going to turn it around. So as far as I know, Lunarz is taking them to champs.
All right. I like it. I really, this was one, obviously, again, the 2 most recent roster changes we've had. I really, I hadn't seen Lunarz for GentleMates, so that's kind of why I'm leaning towards Vancouver here. But, it's an exciting matchup. Two guys who were, less than a month ago teaming together in Challengers, now going at it in the CDL. That's really what it's all about. Like, not necessarily for Neptune because he'd been in the CDL before, but Lunarz going to make his debut. I'm excited to see both these teams in action. I think Vancouver stays hot, though, and I'll go with them for this.
Next up, Boston versus Toronto. I'm going to go with the Ultra, but these teams haven't played each other so far this season, and the Breach have beaten pretty much every other top team in the league except Atlanta. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, I would say, that Boston would come out of this with a win. But I'm going to go with Toronto just to be safe.
Yeah, I'll take Toronto here too. I've said enough about not being super high on Boston, so I think Toronto puts the shenanigans with the alleged online server cheese last week behind them and pick up a win here.
On Sunday, February 23rd, Minnesota versus Vegas, the Rocker.
I will take Minnesota.
LAT versus Toronto. I mean, this is probably, if you're just like looking for the highest quality game, this is probably it. These are like two of the top 4 teams or top 5 teams. Maybe a little bit of a revenge game again for obviously obvious reasons, like Scrap being a part of Toronto the last few seasons.
This has to be the first time they've played, right?
Let me look it up real quick.
I don't, because Toronto's only loss in the qualifiers was to OpTic.
Yeah, this is the first time they played.
Okay, so that's interesting. I'm gonna take LAT here too. Are you're going with LAT?
Yeah, I'm going with LAT.
Yeah, I just think, at this point LAT pretty safe bet against most teams. But this, that there is that interesting narrative there, Kleenex and insight against their former teammate.
I think also if Toronto loses this, and I guess we'll see what happens with the Boston matchup, but so they won the first 6 matches of their season. Well, I guess so they lost in the minor. So they won the first 4 matches of their season, then they lost in the minor, then they won 2 matches in the qualifiers, lost their final qualifying match, and then won a match at the major, then lost 2, lost their first at the major, 2 qualifiers, and then won. So I mean, like, they've been pretty rocky since like they came back from break. They're like, I want to say like 4-5, I believe, post break for the Ultra. Granted, it's not like, it's different. Like we're talking about some online minor tournament, we're talking about online qualifiers, and then we're talking about like an offline major tournament. But it does feel like if Toronto loses, not to LAT, but if they lost to Boston, I think there's like got to be a conversation of like, what the hell is going on with Toronto? Like, they were so highly thought of after those first few weeks in the qualifiers, and they have a real shot of kind of falling down the pecking order, I would say, in the CDL. And then we have Boston versus Cloud9 to finish out the week. I have made my opinions clear about how C9 has been very inconsistent so far this season. And not saying that Boston has necessarily been, I would say that they're consistent in general. They go to game 5s like 98% of the time. So I'll go with the Breach. I think it should be an exciting match, and a lot of narratives could be spun out of this match if C9 loses.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with C9 again. I'm just not super I'm just not a big Boston believer at this point. As far as we know, Boston's still playing from Boston, right? There was that whole thing of like, Boston leaving esports, and
I have no idea.
Like there was the report of like the players had to be out of their apartments or whatever by a certain point. Like, and so I don't even know if they are playing from Boston, but let's just say they are. That's Boston versus LA from an online server perspective. We've heard plenty at this point over the years of the online era in the CDL of the issues for, West Coast versus East Coast matches. And we've heard plenty of Cloud9 online server ping, whatever you want to say at this point. So that could play a factor here. I'm going to take C9.
I think literally C9 could have an issue against any team, like in terms of internet, because at the beginning of the season, it was about LA versus Dallas. So if Boston's either in Boston or Dallas, I don't think there's much of a chance that they're elsewhere in the world, basically. So they're probably either in those two places. If they're in Boston, then it's cross country, and we just saw what they dealt with Toronto. Granted, it benefited them, or seemingly benefited them in that regard. But they also had problems with Dallas-based teams at the beginning of the qualifier stages. So it could be pretty messy regardless. In either way, it doesn't really matter. So we're kind of coming up on an hour and 20 minutes of the show. Pick'em so far this season, Bink is 52-30. I am 47-35. We're going to try to do better than we did last week. We were both hovering around 500 with how many upsets were. One. Yeah, there were a lot of upsets. So, I hope there's, the same level of surprises so far this weekend, but
gives us more to talk about with the online matches.
Yeah, I just don't like to be wrong. So maybe just the upsets happen when Bink picks them and not when I pick them.
Okay.
But yeah, make sure to like or subscribe or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel and you can watch us. I don't know why people would really do that. Like, I don't know why they would want to see our faces. But you can choose to do that. It's your choice. But you can watch the videos. I upload them at the same time as the podcast. So, I upload them at the same time. So like you could watch it pretty much whenever the podcast is out. You can also watch it live when you want to. We were usually live Wednesday and Sunday nights. And you can do that at the YouTube channel, youtube.com. Just type in Ego Chall Podcast. Or you can go to twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast, and you can watch the podcast be live, and you can see all of our screw-ups that I may or may not edit out. Usually I don't edit them out because I'm lazy, and that takes a ton of work. But you can watch it live anyway. But yeah, the podcast goes up on Thursday mornings and Monday mornings, and we really appreciate your support. Trying to get to 300 subscribers on YouTube by the end of the CDL season. I don't really know if we have any other goals. That's just broadly speaking, like in our lives. I don't know if we have any other goals other than that one right now. But you can help us achieve that goal. You can also follow us on Twitter at JBank with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. And the next show. Accidentally muted myself, so I don't know where it hasn't been this whole thing, but it has been like at least 10 seconds of me muting. So I'm not sure exactly where I left off. I'm trying to think where I would have. So we'll be live on Sunday night after the matches. Hopefully I don't mute myself anymore. We'll be live on Sunday evening after the matches to talk about the matches and whatever happens in between that. Other than that, you can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbank with 2Ks. He is past 40 days, right, in the streak. So you can go support him, go follow him. If you enjoy League of Legends, even if you don't, just go follow him anyway. And that about does it. I will try not to mute myself. I should mute myself after I'm done talking. So I will just shut up and Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thanks guys for all the support. Shout out Mike in the Twitch chat today. YouTube chat's a little more quiet than a little quieter than what we've had recently, but shout out everybody who's usually in there, and shout out Mike for saying what's up in the Twitch chat. But yeah, should be an exciting week of matchups. I don't think there's a, even going through them, there aren't a ton of super, intriguing narratives, but, Lunarz debut, that OpTic Carolina match you mentioned, Toronto versus LAT, like there's something. So, we'll be here to break it all down regardless of what happens. Should be a good weekend either way. And then we'll be in minor 2, then finish out those qualifiers, and we're back at LAM before you know it. So, thank you guys as always for all the support. Really do appreciate it. And we'll see you back here soon. So remember to send the chow.